Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pac-12 Chalk Talk, your source for everything Pac-12. I'm Mike Sackley, and our panelists in studio tonight from left to right are Ben Haber, Pierce Bly, and Robbie Baker. All right, while the offense started a little slow for Stanford and USC, the game progressed into one of the best games of the season as the Cardinal beat the Trojans in the Coliseum 56-48, but only after 3 overtimes. What do you guys think were some of the key plays, and how did those plays affect the outcome of the game, Ben?
Yeah, one of the greatest games you're going to see in college football all year, and I think the play that switched this game around in USC's favor, actually, was the Curtis McNeil touchdown to start the half. It really legitimized their chances to come back and win this game. I think they were obviously not able to do so. Another big play that you got to talk about is the fumble in the third overtime. Stanford able to jump on the ball. As you see, McNeil here had a couple good runs to start the second half, but it wasn't good enough. Andrew Luck was way too much.
Yeah, I think the biggest play for me was the personal foul call against USC with 2:12 remaining in the second half. That was on TJ McDonald. Didn't need to hit the receiver because the receiver wasn't even going to catch it, but it was on a 3rd and 6. Stanford would have been forced to punt to USC. USC could have possibly driven down and run some clock off. They could have potentially won the game. That was the big play, in my opinion.
And you're actually seeing my play of the game right here. This pick 6 for USC that actually gave them the lead at the time was my play of the game, because after that play, it kind of lit a fire under Andrew Luck, who came back and ultimately led Stanford to the victory. A quick tidbit about this game, though, I'd like you guys to know at home. Stanford went 3 and out 4 times all season before this game. And in this game, USC's defense forced 3 and outs for Andrew Luck and the Stanford Cardinal. So you got to give mad props to that USC defense in this game.
Thanks for showing up, Robbie, there. Appreciate it. Now, last weekend, we saw a close game between the Arizona Wildcats and the Washington Huskies in Seattle with a final score of 42-31 in favor of the Huskies. Arizona kept it close for a while there, but Washington eventually pulled away. Guys, this loss for the Wildcats have anything to do with the players that were suspended in Week 8 for that brawl against UCLA? Interim coach Tim Kish for the Wildcats was forced to play younger players, but Pierce, did it show last weekend?
It was certainly somewhat of an effect on the game, but I don't think it was the complete effect of why Arizona lost. It was definitely going to be a shootout between Keith Price and Nick Foles at the quarterback spot for both teams, and I was going to pick Washington to win the game anyway. I don't think the having to play younger players was the entire reason that the Wildcats lost.
Yeah, and I also have to kind of agree with what Pierce said there. Yes, their secondary was depleted. They had to play some freshmen that hadn't had any real big game experience. However, Keith Price should have been salivating, chomping at the bit in this game, and he should have had, in my opinion, this should have been his best game of the year. However, the stats say otherwise. They got the win, but it was because of Chris Polk, excuse me, who we'll talk about later, not because of Keith Price.
Yeah, Tim Kish said it here, that we're missing their best cornerback, Shaquille Robinson, who's been very good for them all year. But the thing is, they were able to limit Keith Price. They weren't able to limit Chris Polk on the ground game, so they weren't missing any of the D linemen and the linebackers, the guys that are responsible for really playing the run. So I really don't think it was a factor in the game as much as Tim Kish might think it was.
Now, you guys talked about Polk. After the show Chris Polk put on last Saturday against the Wildcats, some people are saying Polk is the most well-rounded non-quarterback of the offensive players in the conference. Do you guys agree or disagree? Robbie, would you say that Polk is the best all-around non-quarterback?
Mike, I would say that he is the best all-rounded non-quarterback player. You look at his stats, 1,016 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground. He also has 249 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. The kid also averages almost 14 yards per catch when he is out there being a receiver, and he is a dual-threat running back, and he is basically all you could ask for in a running back.
I certainly think, though, and I took this question extremely literally when it said the best all-around non-QB offensive player. I thought Jamal Miles of ASU should belong in that conversation. He's the only player in the NCAA to return a punt, a kickoff for a touchdown, as well as throw a touchdown and receive a touchdown. So when you think about all-around players, he certainly has to be in the top 5 and maybe even the best all-around player, in my opinion.
The thing and the reason why I chose Chris Polk is because I think he could do the things that Jamal Miles has done, but due to his injuries in the past, they don't want him out there returning kicks. So he's done everything you can ask for at the running back position. He receives the ball like a Matt Forte does for the Chicago Bears in the NFL, and he also can hit the hole as well as any running back in the country, 4th in the country in rushing yards. So I think Chris Polk is the best non-quarterback in this conference.
Now, Chris Polk had a fantastic game last Saturday, but he isn't the only Pac-12 running back to put up some impressive numbers. This week, we asked you to compile a list of who you think are the top 3 running backs in the Pac-12 overall. Who did you guys pick and why? And we will start with Robbie on that one.
Well, you look at the graphic right now. We all went with LaMichael James and Chris Polk. Those are two easy picks for the top two running backs. However, the third running back on all of our depth charts, if you will, was where we differed. I went with Cam Marshall from ASU. He has 632 yards on the ground, 12 touchdowns on the ground. He also has 145 receiving yards. And in my opinion, he's the most underrated running back in this conference. He's been a little banged up this year, but if you look at what he's done in some games that maybe aren't against the best opponents like Oregon State, he had that beast mode in him that gave ASU a big victory, and also last week against Colorado, he also had a huge game there as well.
Yeah, and the only reason that I did not pick Cameron Marshall is because Kenyon Barner, I think, is a little bit more talented than Cameron Marshall is. He's not even the main running back for Oregon. He actually hasn't played in 2 games for them this season, and he still averages over 7 yards per rush. He's only 1 TD behind LaMichael James and 2 behind Chris Polk in terms of overall rushing TDs on the season, and he is going to make some big plays when he steps up into the starting role next year when LaMichael James leaves.
Stephon Taylor is my third running back. I think he's been so good this year. But going back to the 1 versus 2, we all picked LaMichael James, but I think that gap is starting to close a little bit, guys. But the thing is that the difference between the 1 and the 2 is LaMichael James averaging over 8 yards per carry, and Chris Polk only has 5. Stephon Taylor doing a lot with a little opportunity. Andrew Luck, obviously the key of that offense. Going back to your guys' picks, Marshall, I think if I was going to go with the power running back, I'd go with John White. And to you, Kenyon Barner, I think he has the talent to be the third best running back, but I don't know if he's proved that yet.
I think he will by next year. He definitely will.
Now, staying with the running back theme, let's go ahead and take a look at our offensive players of the week from this past weekend in the Pac-12. Now, Ben, all you guys picked running backs here. Just talk about your decision and why the running backs were so impressive this week and who you picked.
Yeah, my offensive player of the week, sticking on the bandwagon, Chris Polk, had 144 rushing yards, 4 rushing TDs, 100 receiving yards, and 5 TDs. Talk about fantasy points, Robbie. That's a big-time game for you. And Chris Polk has emerged as one of the best running backs in the country. He had Jake Locker there before, didn't get the opportunities. Now he's getting to show his talents.
I chose Cameron Marshall of Arizona State. He really came out and showed why he was picked to rush for over 1,000 yards earlier this season and why he's ASU's top rusher. He also allows ASU's pistol offense to open up, and other targets like Jamal Miles and Aaron Pflugrad will become more prevalent in this offense if Cameron Marshall is able to produce like he did last weekend.
And Ben actually just mentioned my offensive player of the week. I went with John White from Utah. He had 35 carries, 205 yards, a touchdown. He also, one of those rushes he broke was for 60 yards, so he was a big-time player last weekend for the Utah Utes.
Now, we've been talking a lot about running backs in this show, but let's go to the other side of the ball. Who impressed you guys on the defensive side? Who were your defensive players of the week? And we'll start with Pierce.
Washington's defense and secondary specifically were my players of the week. They have done something that no team was able to do this year, pick Nick Foles off 3 times. They did give up 388 passing yards, but these interceptions were huge and stopped Arizona's momentum towards the end of the game.
And I went with Tevin McDonald of the UCLA Bruins. He had 3 tackles and 3 interceptions in last weekend's game. Of his 3 interceptions, he also got 30 return yards off of them, so he also set UCLA up with good field position as well.
Utah's defense really impressed me, held Oregon State's offense, which you both praised a week ago, to only 6 points, held them to a little over 30 yards running on the ground. Malcolm Agnew's a pretty good running back for them. They really limited him. And passing-wise, Sean Mannion has been pretty good so far this season. They really caused him to get a lot of turnovers.
Now, we have some very intriguing matchups coming up in Week 10 for the Pac-12, starting this Friday with USC at Colorado, and Saturday we have Stanford at Oregon State. Who do you guys favor in both of these games, Robbie?
Well, both of these games should be blowouts, Mike. USC is a much better team than Colorado. You saw what ASU did to the Buffaloes last weekend. USC should be a big winner on the road. And as far as the Stanford-Oregon State game, it should also be a blowout. Andrew Luck and the Stanford Cardinals should win big on the road in Corvallis.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Robbie. USC held their own against Stanford, shouldn't have a problem in Boulder. As for Stanford and Oregon State, I think Stanford will come back pretty strong against the Beavers after a fairly mediocre performance against USC, in my opinion. They should win by at least 3 scores in that game.
Stanford all over Oregon State. I really think they're just too good of a team for them. Stanford, a national championship contender. Oregon State, a rebuilding program. No contest there. USC proved they're the class of the Pac-12. Boulder, the slums of the Pac-12, if you want to say that. So I think USC is going to be all over Boulder.
Also on Saturday, we have Washington State at Cal up in Berkeley and Utah traveling to Tucson to take on the Arizona Wildcats. Ben, who do you see coming out ahead in both of those games?
I like Cal. I think Cal's a better team. We talked about running backs a segment ago, and I think Izzy Sofel is one that didn't get enough credit. I think he's going to get the job done against Washington State. And in the other matchup, I like Arizona at home. Utah's been a little bit disappointing to me so far this season, the ups and the downs. I think U of A is starting to get on the right side of the slope. And the thing is, Brock Osweiler really tore up this Utah defense. So when Utah's been exposed to good quarterbacks, they have failed. And I think Nick Foles is going to really expose them again.
Yeah, Washington State and Cal is kind of a tough one for me to pick. It's kind of a toss-up. I'm going to go with Cal at home just because the only time they've lost at home this year was to USC. I don't think Washington State is as good of caliber as USC, so I'm going to take Cal at home in that one. As for Utah and Arizona, Utah, like Ben said, it just doesn't seem to come up to standards as I want them to. I keep wanting to Utah to do well, but they just don't. So I think Utah, finally under Tim Kish, starting to get something going again. I think Nick Foles will probably have a big game, like Ben said.
And I'm going to take Washington State over Cal. If you look at what Washington State did last weekend up in Autzen against Oregon, they lost that game, but they played very well in my opinion. I think they'll beat Cal on the road. And then as far as the Utah U of A game, I got the banner here behind me. I'm going to take the Wildcats in that one at home.
And finally, to round off college football Saturday, we have the Sun Devils at the Bruins. One of those teams is going to be in the Pac-12 title game representing the South. And the Oregon Ducks up to Seattle to challenge the Washington Huskies. Oregon looking to get a win to set up that big matchup with Stanford next week. But Washington has Pac-12 North aspirations of their own. Pierce, who do you like in both of those games?
Yeah, UCLA has too many questions defensively and at the quarterback position for me to take them, even at home in the Rose Bowl. ASU is now ranked 19th in the nation, and they know that they can keep improving in the polls with a win here at UCLA, so I expect ASU to go in and win that game. As for Oregon and Washington, I'm going to go ahead and pick the upset in this game. It's being played at home in Husky Stadium. I expect Keith Price and Chris Polk to have big games at home, and maybe Oregon struggles on the road, so I'm going to pick the upset and go with Washington.
I'm going to take ASU as well in that game. I think their offense is way too high-powered for UCLA to even have come close to stopping it. The weapons that ASU has on offense and their defenses, ASU's defense that is, has played very well too this year. I think ASU will win big on the road to beat UCLA. And then as far as Oregon and Washington, I think it's hard to pick against Oregon in this game. You saw Stanford pick apart Washington's defense, Washington's defense is not as good as their offense, hardly. So I think Oregon wins big in that one.
The Oregon-Washington game, I'm going to go a little bit in between you guys. You were bold, and you want to say Washington, and you were saying it's going to be a blowout. I'm going to pick right in between. I think Washington's going to put up a good fight, but not good enough. Oregon, a little too talented, but the Huskies are very good at home, so they will put up a good fight with that offense. And UCLA won't be good enough for Arizona State, really starting to click at the right time of the year. I really like Arizona State and Brock Osweiler on the explosive offense.
Well, these great matchups this weekend. It'll be hard to follow every game. I know I'll be watching that Oregon-Washington game, but if you guys only had time to watch one, which one would it be and why? Robbie?
Mike, if it was up to me, I would definitely watch the ASU-UCLA game. ASU has a chance to basically win the South with their win over USC, and USC is not eligible. If they can beat UCLA, who is kind of a contender in the South right now, they would win the Pac-12 South with a win over UCLA, and that's the game I would want to watch this week.
Yeah, I'd agree with Robbie, and this isn't necessarily a go in and take it all the way for ASU. Penalties and mental mistakes could make this a trap game for ASU. I expect them. They haven't really impressed me on the road thus far this season, except at Utah, so that would definitely be my game of the week to watch.
I like Oregon at Washington. Washington really still believes they can win the Pac-12 North. And if they win this game, guys, they're close. They're tied for second if they win this game. So I think there's a good chance that they actually possibly even get a win. The offense is so explosive, and I really don't want to miss this game.
All right, we've come to the end of another episode of Pac-12 Chalk Talk. To stay connected with the Pac-12 Conference, be sure to follow Chalk Talk on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe right here on YouTube. For Ben Haber, Pierce Bly, and Robbie Baker, I'm Mike Sackley, and we'll see you next week.